I'm super happy to be, talking about the product, the topic of product management and, carbon aware software today. My name is François Burra, as you've heard before. I'm calling from Jojoge, colony known as Montreal, Canada. And since I pivoted my I worked for 13 years in the tech industry as a UX designer, product manager, product lead, and strategist. And basically 2 years ago, I decided to pivot my career to fight the climate crisis. And now I help basically any digital company to reduce their digital emissions via training program, via IT carbon assessments, and building low carbon software and online experiences. So that's a bit about me, and feel free to chime in if you want to ask question as I go through the talk. But basically, I just want to start with a bit of a context setting and some data that may be the bad news that we need to hear first. And some of you, I'm sure, knows about it already. But digital emissions are huge. They represent twice the aviation industry, and about the same as the road freight. So about 3.8% in 2021. It kind of ranges from 3 to 5, but 3.7, 3.8 is usually a number that comes a lot. And the thing about it is that especially due to the growth of AI, but also just to the massive adoption of internet and the information and telecommunication technology, is going to raise to 14% in 2040. So when we're talking about being on the path to become net zero or reducing our emissions, we're not necessarily as digital professionals or experts. Our industry is not going to the right direction, let's say. So there's definitely responsibility that we need to start to embody and make our job a climate job. Another set of fact or data points that I find are pretty helpful to understand is kind of how digital has an impact on the climate crisis. And basically, it's kind of twofold. First, there is the impact of manufacturing that is roughly 2/3 of the responsible of the digital emissions, and the other third, or 43%, is basically our usage of the operation. So everything that is related to our electricity consumption, water consumption, and that translated to CO2 equivalent emission. So the key message here is that digital is physical. It's not in the cloud. It's not like a magic, rainbow with unicorns, somewhere above the sky. It's very digital and very physical and anchored in reality. And you can see the breakdown that basically end users and out of end users, the network and the infrastructure and the data centers, most of the emissions come from end users, and specifically the manufacturing on end user devices. So our phones, our computers, screens, and so on. So this is something like there's a big hype around that, how data centers are, the big evil or like mostly responsible for everything when it comes to digital emissions. That's a bit of a enlightening, I think, visual that can help us to put their responsibility in terms of our impact on climate crisis in a different lens. And I kind of like share the bad news and kind of like why right now we contribute we fuel the climate crisis. But basically it comes with also a lot of opportunities. So there's where we can build products that emit less emissions, but also build solutions, build a climate solution, use the tech to solve the climate crisis firsthand. So that's kind of two ways that we can impact the climate crisis. And when it comes to specifically building more carbon aware software or more frugal software, there's tons of resources available. And I'm sure as CAT members, you've already seen a bunch of them, tailored for designers, tailored for engineers, DevOps, and so on. But as a product manager, I found myself, scrolling the web and trying to find something that would talk to me because I was a product lead, in different contexts, in startup, in digital studio, and I didn't find necessarily content that was catered to me and my role and my job. So basically, I kind of look at myself in the mirror and decided that if it didn't exist, maybe there's something I can do myself to try to bring the topic, a bit more in the forefront and try to cater something that would have been useful to me 2 years ago at the beginning of my journey. So that's why I decided basically to do something about it with a peers of mine called Antoine Cabot. And last week on Tuesday, I think, or Wednesday, we launched a playbook, a climate product management playbook called How to Become a Climate Conscious Product Managers. And basically it entails and harvest 33 best practices to reduce emissions from your digital product or digital service. And that is articulated around 5 principles. And I will basically share what those five key principles are. And I'm going to try to do to put into the chat a few links that will hopefully be helpful for you to access it. So there's a direct link for CAT members specifically where you can access the content without having to submit your email. But if you're interested to stay up to date or get updates on the project, I'm going to share also other links that will enable you to sign up by email. So anyway, let's dive into the first principle. And I will also share a QR code if the links for some reason you don't see them or don't work. But the first principle is basically to embed your like climate consideration into your rituals. So first thing, as a product manager, as we know, we can't improve what we can't measure. So the first thing is really to try to measure your environmental footprint. And there's amazing tools out there to do so. I'm just going to mention just a few, but there is a CO2GS, there is EcoGrader, there is Beacon. So there's more or less tools that are specific to web pages or apps, and that you can leverage to already start to understand and have an approximation of your carbon footprint. So there's amazing tools out there. Just start using it. And the goal to start is not to be perfectly accurate. Even 80% accurate is great, as long as you use it as a baseline and you see the trend over time on like how your improvements, have an impact on reducing your emissions. And then in terms of rituals, try to include, carbon emissions as part of your KPIs, as part of your product routines, like in your definition of done, in your definition of ready. When you onboard your designers and your developers, you can set, weight budget to reduce the size of each pages as you create. So try to incorporate CO2 emission as part of the discussion that you have with your stakeholders. And when I talk about CO2 emissions, you can also be more specific related to the electricity that is consumed by your experience, but also the water that is consumed. And again, there is a lot of tools, and I'm sure we can follow up on this call with more examples, but about the tools you can use to do so, but they're widely available, and with a quick search, you can find them. So that's the first principle, really make climate into your product ritual, like embed them into your rituals. A bit of a data point to introduce the next principle is that 80% of new product launch fail. And as you know now, there is emission to anything and everything we create. So everything we create that doesn't serve a user purpose or business purpose equals tons of waste of resources that won't be accessible for other usage, whether it's physical or whether it's just electricity that is consumed. And it ties to the second principle, that is to build mindfully. So build mindfully is it's more like to have a good product discovery, a good research prior to launching anything, and have a strong strategy. So first, it comes to including the climate and the environmental into your brief. It could be just doing your research, validating that your product is actually useful and usable and that would be used, at the end of the day. So talk to your customers. This is just basic product management skills, by the way, right? That we all are aware of, but they have like a huge impact on the climate if we don't do them well or don't do them at all. So that's really the point here. And secondly, I would say, trim down your scope. We tend to over-engineer what we ship. And here you really have to adopt the MVP philosophy, where we make sure that we don't build a useless piece of software that are not required, that are not must have. And one last point on this slide, or on this principle, is to avoid any obsolescence tactics. As we said, like almost 2/3 of emissions come from the manufacturing, right? So don't force users to buy new devices. Don't force them to upgrade their phone because you don't support an old OS, or your product only support the latest iPhone or the latest Android phone. So really make sure that you support old versions, but also and old devices. And that would have not only an environmental impact, but also a social impact, because you make your product more inclusive and more accessible, and probably even improving and making your target market even bigger. So probably even more adoption of your product. So that's something very, very important. Next up, just a piece of data from Almanac that just shows how much software or online experiences are becoming bigger and bigger. And you see, like, we multiply by 7 times the mobile page weight, from 2012 to 2022. And this is not a trend that is likely to stop, right? So we really have to be mindful again about, what we build and the impact that it has. And it leads me to the third principle, that is, to design frugally. So how can you make sure your experience consumes the least amount of energy possible, that is the lightest possible, right? So how can you make sure, again, with the same MVP concept, to build the slim plus lightest experience possible that answer the most critical user story or needs from your user, and scrap the rest. Try to be as straightforward as possible. And when it comes to page weight, specifically what consumes tons of electricity on the end user device in terms of CPU and in terms of like storage capacity into data centers, and the whole back and forth with the infrastructure in like submarine cables and other forms of infrastructure to make the link between the end user device and the data center, are like videos, 3Ds, animations, and huge image that are not optimized, and so on and so forth. That consume a lot of energy. So be super mindful about, what are the assets that you use, and make sure that they don't confuse people. I would just make an example here. You probably all remember at some point, like I think it was like probably 7 years ago, 10 years ago, there were a huge trend in terms of design with using parallax, right? Like you have like different layers in the background and foreground of like multiple things happening. And first, this is a trend, so don't follow the hype necessarily. Just think about it first. And two, it was confusing as hell. At least I'm talking from my own experience, right? Like if it confuses your users, doesn't bring any positive, impact to your business, why are you doing it, right? Like you are not doing it for yourself. You're doing it to serve business need and a user need. And if both are not answered by what you're building, then reconsider the asset or the design that you're putting out there, right? So use 3D. I'm not going to say ban, but use 3D very wisely. Use video very wisely. When you have decorative video in the background, wonder whether it really serves the brand, serve the business, or serve the user. And lastly on this slide, when it comes to being frugal, kill things that are not used or not useful, whether it's data that have never been used to extract insight or build dashboards, or whether it's just features that no one use and never, in terms of frequency and adoption or penetration. Like it's easier to not build useless stuff, but you still have a backup, which is to delete them after the fact. it's not as easy as it sounds. Like we all tried and failed to do so, but this has a lot of impact because it serves, again, no business value, no user value, and it makes your development actually more complex because your code is more complex, and probably the output of your engineers and developers will be lowered because you have like so much piece of software that is probably not used and just useful. Fourth principle, to become carbon aware. So here, a few advice. First, switch to a green host, switch to a sustainable hosting provider. That is basically how the electricity that is consumed is renewable or not. So try to use and leverage as much renewable energy as possible. And there's tons of service provider out there that are being created, everywhere on the planet to offer this kind of possibilities and capabilities. So, look out and try to switch, to a greener hosting. That's something that is fairly easy to do depending on your context. Like if the bigger the organization, the harder it is. But this is something that is fairly accessible and that can have a huge impact on your emission profile. Secondly, try to educate your user about the impact that the software have or the impact of their own action. So here is I'm not saying blame your user. The responsibility of your emissions from a digital standpoint and all your emissions are yours. But let's say you are a transportation company and you offered plane tickets and train tickets. There's probably a smart way to tell them that train is probably a more sustainable option, right? So try to really educate them. And maybe if there is a high peak demand of electricity and that the grid has to leverage some coal, coal power plant or fossil fuel energy power plants, right? Maybe you can raise the flag being like, hey, is there a way we can delay that by a few hours? Is this a critical need that you need now? Or can you wait, maybe can we delay that action, So there's a few ways that you can really try to educate your user and empower them as well. Even though your responsibility at the end of the day is to make green by default, and so that you take ownership about your emissions. And lastly, use the cheapest energy possible. I'm sure some of you are familiar with electricity maps that can show you basically like how green is or how your grid is powered by renewable energy, where depending on where you are in the world and the timing as well, not only the location but the timing. So try to be smart about using the cheapest energy possible. That is most likely the greenest as well. And lastly, my last, the fifth and last principle is to use your influence. As product managers, I think we have a key role that is, I think, utilized. That is that we have an horizontal and vertical influence. And I'm going to explain what I mean by that. Vertical influence is that we tie the strategy and the vision to the execution, right? So we really have the power to influence a lot of stakeholders, from top management to, more practitioner level. But also horizontal influence or transversal influence, because as part of our job, we need to talk to all departments when it comes from sales to customer support and marketing and engineer and design and legal, finance, and so on and so forth. So with all the interaction that we have to, build an initiative, create a new feature, launch a new service, a product, we have capability to really influence our ecosystem, right? So, so use that with your team, but also try to influence beyond your team, like the value chain overall and your partners. You can set up, climate working group. You can raise awareness, organizing talks internally. You can organize trainings. I give myself training to companies, but I'm sure a lot of us, or at least I'm assuming Chris and others in the community, does provide also trainings though. So there's a lot of option out there. So try to, raise the awareness and the skills internally. And I think that would be a great way that you can use your influence. All of us have a network on LinkedIn, and as a company, we may have like thousands of followers, right? And don't hesitate to share about your sustainable journey on how you're trying to reduce your emission. Be transparent. Don't oversell it. Don't claim things that are not true, but just claim that you're trying to get to point A to point B, and this is what you know, what you don't, what you're doing, and what you can't do at the moment. So try to be transparent and collaborative, and I'm sure the response will likely to be positive more than negative. So those are the 5 principles that I feel as product managers really can move the needle in our practice. And I will kind of leave you on that slide that for me, it's very important, because at the end of the day, you have to be convincing people, right? So for me, there's 2 specific benefits or opportunities that you can disclose. First, on the product level, and secondly, on the business level. On the product level, as I said, like if you build a product that is lighter, it's most likely to be faster, so that you would increase your customer satisfaction. And potentially, if you have a transactional website or experience, the conversion rate would be higher. There were like back in the days, I think a tool from Google that would like tell you how much money you're losing for how many seconds your product loads, and how many visitors you have, and what's your average basket, you know, from a dollar standpoint. And that would tell you you're losing, because it loads in 2 seconds or 3 seconds, you could see the money you're losing, you know. So there's a lot of benefits that comes with having a product that is faster and that converts better, but also most likely your SEO will be better. And if it's simpler, also from a technical standpoint, it will be easier to secure, and the security would be improved. And from a business standpoint, a lot of the new generations grew up with climate or eco anxiety, right? So for them, like having an employers that is committed to the climate crisis and to address it to some extent, if as an employer or as a company you're being active on the topic, then the retention and attraction of employees will be higher, but also the attraction of new customers, but retaining existing ones will likely to be improved. And you can think about brand new features that can differentiate yourself from your competition if you're being in the forefront of, you know, the innovation on that topic. And as well with legal and regulations and laws that are being implemented over the world. And I know like the specific law, like in France called REN or RIN in English, that force company or some type of companies to disclose their digital emissions specifically, not just their like business emission overall, but specific to digital. Like if you're being proactive on the topic, you may end up, not being surprised and facing a wall when those regulations are being put in place in your country. So in Canada, I know this is not the case, and I'm trying to push, stakeholders to make this law being adopted as well here, but this is about to come. It's like GDPR. We didn't see it coming from Europe, and suddenly everyone was, had to react to it. So it's a matter of whether you have the luxury to be reactive, or if you want to be proactive in this topic. And being reactive probably will cost more, and it's going to be a less of a fun experience for everyone involved in the company, I would assume. So those are kind of business opportunities. And maybe the last one is that there's so much money being poured to address the climate crisis that probably you can access cheaper capital as well, in form of grants, or a fund, fundraise from VCs and so on, that would likely to be cheaper than now. So basically, like even if your company don't care about the climate, which is the case for many jobs right now or many stakeholders, right? If you lead with the business argument, with how much your product would be improved and how much your business will be improved, it's likely that you can still have a strong climate agenda, without having to lead with the climate or the environment first, but yet have an impact as a product managers. So this slide may look very small, but basically we kind of like grasp and summarize the 33 best practices in a nice visual that you can find also in the link that I share about the executive summary. And we actually just posted on Monday or this week earlier the same content on LinkedIn on climate product leaders. So you'll find it there, and hopefully you have a good read. So that was it for me. As product managers, we have a great, opportunity to make a real change, a lasting change. We have a lot of influences over the way we build product and why we build and what we don't build, which is also important. So, build better products, try to have an impact, and, contribute to the effort to restore the biodiversity and reduce the climate crisis to the extent that we have, a control over and consider, future generation. So that was it for me. If you didn't get the link by then, I'm sure like you can scan that, but I'm pretty sure we're good on that front. So that's it for me. Thank you very much.